Hello, welcome to a special playoff edition of Inside the Birds. I'm Geoff Mosher. I'm joined by Adam Caplan, and of course, from InsideTheBirds.com, our reporter all year long for the Eagles, Andrew DiCecco. We are going to, in this episode, it's like a round table, except for people watching. It's a square screen, same effect. We're going to chop it up on the Philadelphia Eagles as they get ready for their Sunday wild card matchup against the Green Bay Packers and should be a very fascinating matchup. Two story programs in the NFL, the Packers and the Eagles, with a lot of playoff history. In this show, what we'll do is we'll go through the Eagles' strengths, we'll go through some of our concerns, and of course, we'll break down a little bit of their matchup against the Packers. And for those listening, this is not substituting any Inside the Birds podcast or any content. This is bonus, extra playoff content. So with that, we get started. Adam, Andrew, this is great. I'm glad we're having to get together and do this. Why don't we just first take a step back and look at the 14-3 Philadelphia Eagles? Because I know, Adam, when we went into the year, there are a lot of things, and Andrew, you know this too. There are a lot of things we could not have predicted. Zach Bond, for example, Mekhi Becton, for another example. So we went into the year, Adam, I remember we felt that the Eagles would be a contender for the division and a strong team, but I don't think we were in the 14-win neighborhood there. This has truly been a remarkable season for the Eagles.
Yeah, it definitely exceeded my regular season expectations. And we'll say it again, which we said now for 7 years. Coaching matters. The coaching here, particularly on defense, has been superb. It's a big deal. The player buy-in, Andrew knows this from going to training camp and being around the players in the locker room and so forth, to get to know the players. It's just a great coaching job. It's so far they've exceeded my expectations, but it's funny because we try not to redo them as we go, along here. But this thing is so good. I mean, they're gotten healthier at the right time. This team is really, really good, and they are absolutely poised to make a run. So that would be my big picture take. Again, it's always nice when they're better than you think, not worse than you think. That's
Right.
That's not what you're looking for.
Yeah, and a credit to us. I mean, at 2-2 going into the bye off that terrible loss they had to Tampa, Andrew, we made a note to say you just don't recalibrate in September unless everything is going wrong. And the Eagles had some things that were not good. They also did have some things that were good. We didn't recalibrate, to Adam's point, and say, man, this team is going to be a 500 team all year long. We still thought they were going to be good and playoff contender. But if anything, as Adam mentioned, they improved to a point that we didn't see coming. I mean, the Eagles then going on and from 2-2 to then go 12-1 over the next 13 games, pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and kind of to piggyback off what Adam was saying, player development has been huge for this Philadelphia Eagles team. They've leaned on players that last year what they couldn't produce. Nolan Smith, Nakobe Dean, Zach Bond's been a great story. You look at the rookie corners, Grant Calcaterra, Fred Johnson, you name it. Like last season, if you really think back, you'd be hard pressed to find one player who improved, who got better. I think if you really rack your brain, you might say Jordan Mailata. But I think a lot of the players that they've had to lean on have stepped up and filled crucial roles for this football team. You have to give a lot of credit to the Christian Parkers of the world, Bobby King, Clint Hurtt, Jeremiah Washburn, Jeff Stoutland, of course, for making it all happen.
Yeah, let's go back to February because something happened last February. We were all there for it at Indianapolis in the Combine. And I remember us having a discussion as we're plotting out our coverage for Inside the Birds, saying, wow, this was said in a press conference by Howie Roseman, and it's either going to be an alarming look at the Eagles going into the future, or it's going to pay off and we're all going to be singing his praises. And what Howie Roseman said at the Combine that day in his press conference was, we're not going to be afraid next year to move on to some younger players and play our younger guys and see how that works out. And, he was talking about guys like Nakobe Dean and Nolan Smith, for example. And we didn't know it then, but I'm sure he knew he was going to do his best to draft some defensive backs, Cooper DeJean, Quinyon Mitchell, and of course, move on to center, Cam Jurgens, still a young guy who'd never played center. Well, the combination of the development of those young guys and some of the veterans that they brought in, like a Saquon Barkley, of course, has really made the difference for this team. Adam, you remember those conversations we had when Howie laid that gauntlet down. We were kind of like, this is going to go one way or another.
Yeah.
I remember that being kind of very pivotal moment in the franchise.
It's funny because I remember after Nick got the job, we had some good intel, and we were told that Nick Sirianni put a ton in on player development, right? And then last year he made a comment about they were just trying to win games, and it was not a great comment that he made about player development. It was more about they were trying to win games and not worrying about developing players. And then, how he made his comments about, the younger players have to play, they have to develop players. So I was kind of like, okay, where's this thing going?
Mm-hmm.
Then we fast forward to OTAs. Okay, you start making some notes. Some of the younger players look okay, but you can't tell because they're not in pads, there's no tackling, there's no hitting. Then we get to training camp. And you start to see some players develop a little bit better. And you go, okay, let's see what happens. Ironically, a guy we just saw, Tanner McKee, because he's got that big arm, but you don't know what it really means until it really counts. But Jeff, the thing that surprised me, because this rarely happens, when you don't see it in training camp. Nolan Smith at times was okay in training camp, but there was nothing that showed you that he was ready. As a matter of fact, I remember writing this down. Ironically, against the Packers, he was their fourth edge rusher. BG was clearly ahead of him. In fact, he was for a while.
Mm-hmm.
It took Nolan Smith about 6 games to become a starter. So there are some things you couldn't predict, but the cool thing about Nolan Smith is once he got it, he got it. And I would send it over to Andrew, who's in the locker room all the time. Could you sense the confidence of these young guys?
Oh yeah, it's palpable. And when you start to see the results, you buy into your coaching, and you can hear. We've heard all the players throughout the summer say, "I'd like to be coached hard." Vic's old school, and we like that. And it sounds great in the summer, but how are you going to be able to take that coaching in October or November? They did. And when you start to see results, it's a lot easier to do that. And I think it becomes a mentality. When someone like Nolan Smith starts to make plays, when Jordan Davis starts to make more plays, you sort of build that confidence. You see the direction in which you're headed, and it sort of becomes contagious. And I think a lot of that is attributed to Vic Fangio and his style of coaching, and also the position coaches that I think have done a marvelous job in putting them in position to be successful and really maximizing their ability.
Yeah. So, Andrew, you were among the leader of the pack of Eagles beat reporters to really chronicle, starting from early in September, Nakobe Dean especially, talking about this defense wanting to forge an identity, as you wrote about many times, a junkyard defense, a lunch pail defense. And that's really what they become. Let there be no mistake. Jalen Carter is a blue chipper, and not Nakobe Dean. Zach Baun has played like an all-pro. And of course, in the defensive backfield, they have a lot of talent. But this defense, compared to some other household names in the league, doesn't have that same kind of recognition where people in, Seattle or Houston may know all of the Eagles players on defense. But this is a good defense, and it is a junkyard defense. It is a very difficult defense to run against, and they will hit you once week 5 coming out of the bye and on, they will hit you, and they swarm to the ball. I think the TV broadcasters have all done a really good job of pointing out how quickly, when someone catches the ball against the Eagles, they get swarmed, and how many guys are in the vicinity of the ball. So we'll talk about this throughout the show. We're going to get into some concerns that we have about the team. We're going to get some strengths that we have. But to close it off from a big picture standpoint, Adam, how good are the Eagles? Will they win? Are they a Super Bowl team?
Can they win it? Yes. That's what you're asking me. Can they win?
Yes.
Are they capable of it? Yes, because the roster and the coaching is so good. It's just amazing. The collapse last year, I think we would all admit, although I know Andrew and I picked the Eagles to be, 11-6. My max,
Yeah.
I give a max and a minimum for each team. My max for the Eagles was 13 wins. They beat it. They beat 14. They got to 14. But there were just so many unknowns to this team, and everything's been answered. I mean, who thought the weakness of the football team would be special teams? Not I can't. I don't know about you guys, but I didn't think so. Not a major weakness. We'll talk. We'll get into that, and kind of I could further give you some information on kind of what's been happening with Jake Elliott, at least what I think based on people I've spoken with. But this thing is the train is running really, really well right now. Remember Andy Reid? We go back to the Eagles, right? Geoff, particularly when you were covering the team, the mid 2000s, late 2000s. Andy they kind of tread water September, October, some of November, and play their best ball.
Mm-hmm.
You see him doing it in Kansas City, and you sure saw this for the most part with the Eagles before. Obviously, it fell apart in 2012. Nick Sirianni, we haven't talked about him yet, really. You could say what you want about him. I know he's got his detractors. Look how the team finishes. That's important. Mm-hmm. This year, they're finishing well, unlike last year.
Andrew, are the Eagles the best team in the NFC and the NFL?
I think so. I mean, you'd be hard pressed to, and we're going to get into this, to find a weakness. And when I look at what the Eagles are best at, running the football, they have a bully style offense. The offensive line wears teams down throughout the game. You can see teams at times that they don't want any part of tackling Saquon Barkley at the end of those games. And then you couple that with the fact that they have a dominant defense and they swarm to the football and they're tenacious and they're physical. I mean, that is a recipe that will translate anywhere you go in the postseason. And compared to some of the other teams, some of their contemporaries, I think that the Eagles are probably best equipped to make that deep run.
My opinion on it, guys, is that the Eagles have the best 53-man roster, at least in the NFC. Not by a huge margin, but by enough to be better on paper than every team. But I do believe when I look at the Lions, they remind me of the 2017 Eagles, where they've never won. They're on a mission. They've got all these injuries, and they overcome all the obstacles in their way week after week. The Lions are the only team in the NFC that I think, especially in Detroit, could beat the Eagles. It's not that I don't think the Packers are around to could be. Let me rephrase this. I think the Eagles could get tripped up and lose, but if the Eagles play well in the first round and the second round, I think they'll win, no matter who they play. If they play well in the conference championship against the Lions, I can still see the Lions winning. That I had the Lions in the Super Bowl against the Chiefs in our preseason preview.
Nice.
I'm not backing off of it, not because I predicted it, but because I think we all watch the Lions on a weekly basis, and it's hard for me to see them losing. I think they can lose, but I do think they would be the favorites. If the Eagles do make the Super Bowl, I believe I'd be hard pressed to see to go against them. Chiefs are really good, though. We'll see what happens when we get there. But in my opinion, while the Eagles have more blue chip talent than the Lions, there's something about the Lions this year that makes me think they are a team of destiny. And you can kind of get that feeling the same way with the Bills, too. Also, not a team with as much blue chip talent as the Eagles or the Lions, but sort of one of those teams of destiny. So we will see
I'm not.
how it
I'm not
shakes
sold
out.
on. I'm not sold on Dan Campbell and his in high leverage moments in coaching. He cost them the NFC Championship game. He made some really egregious decisions, and they're
Mhm.
really banged up on defense. They can score with anybody, but I have to think that those injuries are going to catch up with them sooner or later. Not every team had that sort of Cinderella feel like the 2017 Eagles. That was a rare case. And Dan Campbell, I think, is going to be what potentially holds the Lions back.
It's interesting. Aggression hurt them in that game, but it certainly helped Doug Peterson win a Super Bowl. So it's kind of one of those things where it's just the result of the play. If it works, you look like a genius. If not,
Of
at
course.
least Dan Campbell has been consistent with how he's coached, and that has generally been a winning formula for them. Adam.
Yeah, it has. No, he's Dan Campbell. They go for it. It's not just the analytical data. I've heard him talk about it. Mark Schlereth, our friend of Inside the Birds, we're gonna need to have Stink on soon. He had a great on that new show he's on. I think it's called Breakfast Ball. He talked about setting the identity of the football team. You never waver. You always go for it. You don't let them think that they're not going to go for it, and you show confidence in your football players. As a former player, I get why Campbell would do that. But the one issue, and Andrew was talking about why maybe they're not good enough, they've got a major problem at corner. Believe it or not, there's a Kindle Vildor, a former Eagle who had a start last year on the outside. He's not even an outside corner. Depending on what's up with Terrion Arnold, he may have to start again.
He was on the Eagles practice squad late last season.
Yeah. And then he went up starting in the playoffs, which can't happen. They've got so many problems in the back end of their defensive corner in particular, and inside backer, they're down 3 guys. But that to me is the issue for them, is not the talent. They could beat anybody. It's who's going to line up.
Sure. All right, let's get into the Eagles and some of our concerns for this team, some of the things that we think are really strong, and then we'll finish it off with a little playoff preview of against the Packers. I think Adam mentioned the biggest concern. And Andrew, I'll throw it to you because you're around these guys and I want to get your sense. You wrote a couple of weeks ago about Jake Elliott, which I thought was a really good story that illustrated how his confidence itself had not wavered. He's going to keep swinging, you wrote. And then he wound up making a few big ones after that. But then again, in the season finale, I know it was windy. He used to be a very good kicker in the wind. He just has not been the Jake Elliott this year of years past. And as I've brought up a couple of times, if you go back to the Super Bowl 2 years ago, it's a punt return by Kadarius Toney that sets up a really significant game-turning touchdown for the Chiefs. I am now concerned after telling Adam for weeks that I was not. I go into the playoffs concerned about Jake Elliott and the whole operation of field goal kicking. What have you gleaned from Jake Elliott, and what do you see in the issue there?
No, I think it's fair at this point, Jeff, to have some sort of concern about the kicking game because, once or twice, okay, that's a blip on the radar. But when it starts to happen with the frequency that it is, that's a trend, and that's something that is concerning. Jake Elliott isn't a player, at least from what I've been able to kind of glean, that he's lost confidence. I don't think that. I just think that, I mean, you saw him make a kick against the Commanders that was a 50-yarder in a critical moment, but I mean, he missed a 39-yarder on Sunday. He hit the 24-yarder. It's just very up and down for him. And I don't know that the Eagles in a tight game, if he's going to be able to step up and make the big kick. So it is a valid concern. Another one I would look at, and it's not a concern at the moment, but in the postseason it can be, and that is the pass rush, because the Eagles, they don't get to the quarterback with a ton of frequency, and against some of the better quarterbacks that you're going to be facing, it's going to be essential that Josh Sweat's able to get home with somewhat regularity. Nolan Smith, Jalen Hunt is your third edge rusher. Bryce Huff struggled against the New York Giants and a lot of their reserves. So that's something to keep an eye on. If you're really, and we're splitting hairs here, but those are two areas for me that really stick out.
Honestly, I wouldn't say it's splitting hairs. The pass rush, Andrew, on your point, like if you go back after week 6, for almost 2 months, they had the NFL's best pass rush in terms of pressures and sacks, and then they fell off. So it's actually on my sheet on my list, Andrew. I'm thinking that week off that the starters got, Geoff, as I sent it back to you, that's got to help them because they look a little tired. Though it's comical because Greg Cosell sent us these stats. The Eagles defense has been on the field the least in the National Football League, but yet they looked a little tired late in the season.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're talking about a quarterback they're going to face in Jordan Love, who does not take a lot of sacks, 14 sacks all year long. He has had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 games this year that he has not been sacked in at all. And then about 3 others where he's only been sacked once. So for the most part, it is hard to sack Jordan Love. He's very elusive in the pocket, and he has a strong arm, and he's a deliverer of the football to a multitude of pass catchers.
And they don't have a deep rotation, which I think is where the concern really stems from, because your third round pick, Jalen Hunt, is now your third edge rusher, because you haven't gotten what you expected out of Bryce Huff. So it leaves them very lean and highly dependent on Josh Sweat and Nolan Smith to get home. And Jalen Carter, of course, wreaking havoc along the interior.
Right. Now, Adam, going back to Jake Elliott, this causes, and we're going to find out pretty early here, I imagine, in the playoffs, what kind of confidence level Nick has. It's to me, it's not about as much if the game is tied with 2 minutes left and he's got to nail a 35-yarder. That's not what it's about. It's about if the game is tied and it's the fourth quarter and it's 3rd and 8 at the Packers 40, right? And you don't get the first down. Are you bringing out the field goal unit, or are you going for it on 4th down or punting, which are areas that the Eagles don't want to have to be concerned with? And we've seen at times very mixed success with Nick Sirianni on his 4th down decision-making. And I'm not blaming him because, again, you're just blaming the end result, right? Sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. But that's the situation that used to be crystal clear. We bring Jake Elliott out, we kick the field goal, we take the lead and make the other team beat us. Now, Andrew, you've put different options and made Nick have to decide on the fly in a playoff game what he wants to do. And some of that might be based on just what's already happened in the game.
Yeah, and what's crazy to think is I think more often than not, Nick will now lean on his offense to pick up those yards. Mm-hmm. Given the playmakers that they have, the offensive line, I think he's going to probably place more trust in the offense because, I mean, Jake Elliott has cost the Eagles, and it's to the point now where he's far from automatic. And, he's built up plenty of equity with the Philadelphia Eagles, but it's what have you done for me lately? And right now he's a shell of his former self.
Yeah, it's not a strength issue. He's got plenty of that. It's not. We reported this at the time when this group was hired, when Nick was hired. There was a problem with the operation, and they cleaned it up. And Jake became. I mean, I don't have the metrics in front of me. He might have been the best kicker over the past 3 years. Certainly one of the top 3.
He was an All-Pro last year.
Yeah, there you go. So, but man, this year is crazy. So I believe from looking into it, it's been more mechanics. I'm not an expert at this, so forgive me. But quarterbacks, we could describe to you what the mechanic issue is, but with it could be the way he finishes because you saw last week, and I know it was windy. Boy, that ball sailed on him where it looked he hooked it. He's pushed some kicks. Folks, he's missed 8 field goals this season. Okay, and 5 in the second half of this season. So that's not good. He's only missed, I think, 1 extra point. But Andrew, that's not good. Like you can't have that. It's a very good roster, but the worst thing you could do, and Geoff set it up very well, Andrew. You would hate it to come down to a decision that Nick normally wouldn't have to make because he would go with it. If it's he let him kick a 58-yarder. He's never had a problem doing it. But what is your?
He did say that him not kicking off for most of the season had nothing to do with him missing kicks or not being warmer in the flow of the game because he said he has his own warm-up process that he goes through. Okay. I think it's just mechanical. I don't think it's up here.
No, it's
I don't
not.
think it's a mental thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, hey, what Andrew just mentioned it. That's another issue I have. Could they let Elliott kick off, please? I mean, Andrew, would you not agree, Braden Mann, it's not working?
Especially when the weather's cold as it is right now, it's not going to work.
So you reported that they started practicing with Jake Elliott doing the kickoffs. Mm-hmm. I guess they were doing both. They were working Braden Mann and Jake Elliott, and it was
a Thursday after the Commanders game. Mm-hmm. And you heard Nick Sirianni was supporting Braden Mann. We're gonna keep the operation the same. Michael Clay echoed the same sentiment. Then Thursday we're out there and we see Jake Elliott kicking off to Braden Mann. And I thought that maybe they were just trying to have him sharpen his tools. But then you go out there and then against the Cowboys, it was Jake Elliott that was kicking off.
Mm.
So I think that may be something they may want to revisit in the postseason.
All right, let's move on to just the last concern that we've discussed, and it's more about a conditioning and a health thing and a readiness thing than an actual talent thing. That's JalenHurts because he suffered the concussion against Washington. He was out against the Giants. Did not return till practice that week that they were preparing for the Giants as he was still in the protocol. So if he takes the field for today's practice, that'll be the first time in quite a while. And when he plays against the Packers, assuming he does, then that's going to be his first game in several weeks. Adam, I've heard Jason Avant talk about this. Quentin Michael talked about it. We've talked to other people. There is no doubt that the speed of the game, they say this about the NBA playoffs too, but the NFL playoffs is faster and quicker. And Quentin made a point of saying it's tough when you miss the last few weeks going into it because everything's fast around you and you're still trying to play catch up. You have a little bit of a slow start concern because of Jalen knocking the cobwebs off.
Hurts has not practiced since December the 20th. It was that Friday for the Commanders game in week 16. So you're talking about nearly 3 weeks. As we know, he got hurt very early in that game in the first quarter. Mm-hmm. So it's the timing thing because, man, in the Pittsburgh game, he played perhaps his best game of the season. And by the way, the level of throws that he had to make, like the Cincinnati game, that was a pitch and catch game. Like you should be able to make those throws. There's some great throws in the Pittsburgh game. Once he really not made previously, and you like to build off that, and then he gets hurt, unfortunately, and he sits the Cowboys game and the game last week against the Giants. So it's very important that he gets not only all the reps, obviously he will take all the reps if he's cleared today or Wednesday, but the key is to get a lot of reps, get his timing back, because that's the thing, man. You talk to players over the years, the three of us have, when you haven't been there doing it for a while, particularly at the quarterback position, it's not easy to get it back.
Yeah.
No, it's not. And, the Eagles have started out slow offensively. So now with JalenHurts not having played or practice really since Adam said December 20th, that's a long layoff. But I would counter that by also saying that Jalen's played over 900 snaps this year. He's played a lot of football. None of the starters played in the preseason, and that was a big talking point going into it. Was that the right approach? He goes out there against the Green Bay Packers. He throws for 278 yards, 2 touchdowns. Granted, he has 2 turnovers as well. But among the Steelers game, I would also think that the Packers game is one of his best games throwing the football, despite not having seen game action. Mm-hmm. But he was practicing. So that's the different part here. I don't know how much you're able to do by simply getting mental reps, especially when the bullets are live in the postseason and things happen a lot faster.
I like the point you made about his experience. We're going to go ahead now and talk about some of the strengths that we think were really going to help the Eagles throughout the playoffs. And one of them, it's something that's not talked about a whole lot. In fact, the players themselves don't really discuss this. Sort of the way the Lions narrative is they're on a mission. They're trying to get to where they couldn't get to last year. It was only 2 years ago the Eagles lost the Super Bowl. And I know they had an implosion at the end of last year, but if you look at the players who return to this team who lost that Super Bowl, Hurts, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, almost all the offensive line, Dallas Goedert. I mean, a lot of the guys on the D line. CJ GJ even was an Eagle back then, even though he left to be a Lion and then came back to the Eagles. There, you would think, Adam, would be a lot of motivated guys. And it's interesting you haven't heard them talk about being on a mission to determine. They've been very workmanlike and businesslike all year long. But there's got to be, A, there's a benefit to having all that experience and being in that moment. And B, there's got to be a little bit of a drive there.
I mean, if you look at their roster that will line up against Green Bay on Sunday, a lot of these guys were with the Super Bowl team. Jordan Davis was a rookie then.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at the defense, Sweaty's back.
Nope, Jordan Davis was a rookie. Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought you said Jalen Carter.
For sure.
Yeah. Yep.
Sweaty, Davis, Milt Williams. Now, Kobe Dean didn't really play then, obviously, because he was a rookie. Slay, of course. You mentioned C.J. Gardner-Johnson. Blankenship, we forget he did start the Super Bowl, correct?
No, he didn't start. He was in for one play, and it was the play that Bradbury got the holding call.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that's right.
Good memory. Okay. Obviously, Devontae, Mailata, Dickerson, Lane, AJ. That was his first year. Obviously, it was a great year. Obviously, Hurts. So Jake Elliott, of course. So yeah, they've got a ton of experience. You like that. You'd really like that to have that when you need to make a playoff run. And the other thing is, they know they're in 22. The thing that there was I don't want to say there was a ton of hype, but there was enough that they know they were good. On my training camp tour, I remember when I was with the Browns when they had the joint practices. Someone from the Browns was awed by the Eagles roster and how good they were. They knew they were really good. This year, there was like, okay, they felt they were good, but they didn't know how good because of the defensive changes. But now that you've seen it, Geoff, as I sent it back to you, this thing, they've got the experience, as you said. They're pretty healthy, right? This is the healthiest, almost the healthiest they've been all season, other than obviously the guys who got hurt during the season. But as the season progresses, this is kind of like the healthiest they've been. They're poised right now to make a big run.
Yeah, and that's a good word you're using. For the most part, a lot of these players are poised for the moment. I do have some concerns about the younger guys, Jalen Carter, and a guy like CJ, who's not young, but he loses his control. I do remember early in his career, Travis Kelce hurting the Chiefs in some playoff games by losing his control and getting some penalties. Everybody remembers that Travis Kelce had a temper issue, and he got flagged for it, and he would hurt the Chiefs in the playoffs. I believe this is, right as Patrick Mahomes was coming in his first year of starter. It might have been the last year of Smith too. I don't remember, but I do worry a little bit about that. But for the most part, it's a veteran team. And a guy like A.J. Brown, I think all he wants to do is win. I think all Devontae Smith wants to do is win. Saquon Barkley, Andrew DiCecco came here because he thought it was going to help him win a Super Bowl. And I have a feeling the veterans will spread that word among the younger players in the locker room because, again, I go to the NBA. The NBA, they call it tighter in the playoffs, right? You have to keep it all in control. And I think the veterans are going to have to spread that message to the younger players, a lot of them who are starters, especially in the secondary this week, about being calm, composed, not letting some adversity in a game impact them.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned Saquon Barkley because for as impactful as he's been on the field, he's been almost as impactful off the field as a leader, leading by example. I've heard countless players cite his leadership and as a bonus to what they get with Saquon Barkley. Also, Jordan Mailata has really grown and stepped up as a leader this year. Lane Johnson's been tremendous, sort of filling in for that Jason Kelce type of role. Landon Dickerson's a good leader. And then on the defensive side, you mentioned two players you're kind of concerned about. If teams can kind of get under their skin a little bit, how are they going to react? And one player who's really been a steadying force out there is Kobe Dean, being that defensive leader. If you ever notice, when Jalen Carter had the unsportsmanlike, it was Kobe Dean that was talking to him. When there was a scuffle after the Panthers game, when Milton Williams was in there and players were getting after it before halftime, it was Kobe Dean that was breaking it up. And when I asked Kobe about that, he said, yeah, I learned that from TJ Edwards a couple of years ago. When you wear the green dot, you can't get thrown out of the game. So he said, if you notice, I was trying to be the peacemaker, trying to break things up. So wow. I feel like he's sort of that stabilizing presence there, wearing the green dot, and he has natural leadership ability that I don't think that he'll allow that to go off the track.
That's really interesting about TJ Edwards. So a guy who's certainly developed man, the Eagles for 2 out of the last 3 years or 3 out of the last 4 have done a pretty good job, not only developing talent at a position that they're usually deficient at, but also some good leaders there. That's good to know. Playoffs. We're talking about playoffs? You bet we are. Get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Scoring touchdowns is the key to winning in the playoffs, and you can score big by betting on them at DraftKings, the #1 place to bet touchdowns. Ready to place your first bet? Try betting on something simple, like a player to score 6. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick. The lines are already up on DraftKings. The Eagles 4.5-point favorites against the Packers. Lines and odds are subject to change. New DraftKings customers can bet $5 to $200 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use the code BIRDS pregame. That's code BIRDS pregame, all one word, for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort, 21 plus age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/audio. Let's talk about the matchup here, because the Eagles have a great offensive line. The Packers have a very good front six. They can rush the passer. They have tenacious guys. The guy in the middle, Kenny Clark, is very difficult. Van Ness is good. Rashawn Gary's good. Quay, their linebacker. I mean, this will be a
Quay
really
Walker, yeah.
Quay Walker, yeah. This will be a really good, another Georgia guy. Don't they have Devontae Wyatt as well? Another Georgia.
Yes. Yeah.
There's going to be so much Georgia on the field. It's going to be
That's
crazy.
right.
But this should be where the game is won and lost. The Eagles O-line versus the Packers defensive front.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, they've got some issues in the secondary corner because they're very light there. But no, Kenny Clark, Slayton, Igbenegbu is still there. Rashawn Gary, Isaiah McDuffie, who's the guy that Saquon beat for the touchdown on the wheel route, I believe, in week
Fraction
one.
of an inch. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Edgerrin Cooper, who's not starting technically. He actually backs up Quay Walker, and who's still in the Packers. Former Eagle, not great, Eric Wilson.
That's
right.
me.
That's right.
Yeah, and look, they've got they're great at safety with Bullard and McKinney, who's been amazing.
Bullard, another Georgia guy.
Yeah, I know,
Right.
exactly. But yeah, this is and Keyshawn Nixon,
That's the most underrated player on the defense, in my opinion.
Because Andrew, no one thought that. Everyone looked at him as really a special teams returner, and they kept letting him get reps at corner. Now he's become a good player. But that's, to me, if the Eagles can protect, which they should be able to do. I know it's a good front, as you said, Geoff. But if they can protect, you're going to throw against them and you're going to have success. It's just, we'll see. It's not easy. It's not easy. But the thing is, I always trust that Eagles offensive line. It's very rare. The one game where they got handled, Geoff, was it the Washington game Greg Cosell told us? It's the Washington game?
The offensive line did not play well against Washington.
Yeah, that was it. The whole season. That was it.
Yep, very good season. And by the way, we can't neglect to mention Xavier McKinney, who I think was second in the NFL in interceptions this year.
7.
It's amazing how the Eagles and Packers almost did the same exact things in the offseason. They went after top running backs, Barkley and Josh Jacobs, who have been really instrumental to both teams' offensive success. And they both went after safeties, CJ and Xavier McKinney, and both of them have been really good additions.
Eagles tried to sign McKinney. Oh, that was their first guy. It was Darnell Savage, an ex-Packer. They actually were late on. They actually looked into it, but he had agreed verbally, I'm told, with Jacksonville. So, Geoff, if you look at their list, on your point, they were getting a safety. Like, they weren't waiting for the draft. They were getting a safety. And I give Howie credit. No bridges were burned, despite what CJ said to the fans and all the madness. Boy, right when you think you understand Howie, people say, "Oh, he holds grudges." Hey, he could have not resigned him, but that look at the way that CJ is closing the season here. I know he had a couple plays he'd like to have back, but overall, he's ended the season pretty well.
I want to ask you this, Andrew, because Adam, talked about the firepower that the Eagles have on the offensive side, and the issues that the Packers have in the secondary. Keyshawn Nixon is an underrated player, but I always thought he was really good at nickel. He has to play outside, I think, now because of no Jair Alexander. So clearly, the Eagles want and can take advantage of AJ Brown and Devontae Smith on the outside if they're able to block it up. So if you go back to the first game, the Eagles did have some explosive touchdowns, not just the wheel route to Saquon Barkley, but they had a 67-yard touchdown pass to A.J. Brown as well. Devontae Smith had 84 yards on 7 catches. We haven't seen the explosive element consistently over the second half of the season. We've seen a
Right.
lot, other than Saquon Barkley. Can the Eagles beat the Packers playing methodically, or do you believe they need explosive pass plays to win that game?
I think they can win by playing methodically because the Eagles are a vastly different team compared to the one that played in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And what I mean by that is their defense has really settled in and they've adapted well to Vic Fangio's system. They're a defense that will suffocate you. And I think they can keep the game a little bit close and allow JalenHurts and the offense to really find their footing early, because I do expect it to be a slow start for the Eagles offense. And I would expect the Eagles to try and control the clock with Saquon Barkley and that offensive line really trying to bully their way down the field as they really have all season.
Adam, I think I'm on the other side of Andrew on this. I think this is a pretty good Packers team. It's a good defense. A lot of people can look and say, yeah, they lost, what did they lose? 6 games, I think it was. Well, the last game of the year, the Bears, they pulled their starters. And then the other losses came to the Vikings, who have a very good defense, the Lions, who might be the best team in the NFL, and of course the Eagles. I think at home, I think the Eagles are going to need some explosive pass plays to win this game. I think if they don't get at least 1 or 2, they're going to be in trouble.
I would say this about the Eagles with the ability how of course Barkley could be the explosive play guy, particularly in second half, but
He
you
could
can't
be.
always count on that. You can't always count on that because we know in the first half, I don't know what I still can't understand that his first half of games numbers comparatively to the second half. But now, with the one thing you worry about, cold weather is not a big deal, but if you have cold weather and wind, then it's a big problem.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have more on the weather when we do the pregame show. But if the weather holds up, yes, because to me, you got to be able to hit explosive plays with AJ Brown, especially. One of these games that for whatever reason it hasn't happened as much as we thought, because it sure as hell did in 22 with Miles Sanders and Hurts and AJ. You would think one game where the team says, "Okay, you're not going to be able to run the ball against us." Like now, of course, Hurts got hurt against Washington because remember Washington stacked the box, and they were not going to let the Eagles run against them, but Kenny Pickett couldn't do it, and it's not his fault. It's not like he knew he was going to be playing that game. But you would think one of these days where the team tries to take away the run, they stack the box, and then they want Hurts to beat them, that he has a little bit of the 22 magic. I just thought that would happen a lot more than we've seen this season.
Yeah, me too. Go ahead, Andrew. You were going to say something?
No, I agree. I think one thing that has plagued the Eagles offense is the slow starts, and it has been directly attributed to the passing game. I go back to the Browns game. Jalen Hurts started 0 for 5. There are plays to be made on the field when he has struggled. And now you're asking a player who hasn't played in a game. He played 5 minutes against the Commanders to go in there and really jumpstart the offense and make those explosive plays. That's why I think it's going to be more of a slow and plodding approach to get Saquon going and really try to get Jalen back into the flow of the game and hope you get out of there with a win.
Let me add this. The last full game he played against Pittsburgh, they surprised, because I know you, me, and Greg, Geoff, were debating what would happen.
Mm-hmm.
And Jeff's like, I mean, I know Greg felt like they should come out throwing more because of Pittsburgh's struggles in the second round. I was like, yeah, I'll believe it when I see it, because they haven't done that.
Right.
They did in 23 and 22. And wouldn't you know it, 5 out of the first 6 called plays were passes. I was like, oh, geez, wow. And by the way, Hurts played his ass off that game.
Well, the big thing that sticks out, Adam, to your point, is that, and there's some similarity here with the Packers, the Eagles in that game came out passing, but not just passing. They came out from spread, and they came out in no huddle. And what they did is, and we
which game? Which game?
This is the Steelers. Steelers game. Spread formations, no huddle, and really caught the Steelers and their inability to substitute players that they like onto the field. Now, the Steelers rotate two different linebackers. They rotate Landon Roberts and the rookie from NC State, Peyton Wilson, right? And there were times we showed on tape with Greg Cosell that the no huddle prevented the Eagles from getting the right linebacker on the field. And also, there were times Cam Hayward wasn't on the field, Keanu Benton was on the field. The Packers, as you mentioned, play Edgerrin Cooper, but they also play other linebackers. Devontae Wyatt. No, not Wyatt. I'm sorry, Quay Walker. They play some other guys. So if the
Eric Wilson.
Eric Wilson, right. Eagles can probably help themselves here and limit the Packers' substitution ability by going up tempo, spreading it out, trying to get their offense going, and not letting the Packers get the right personnel on the field. That would actually help them maybe even score some points in the first quarter for a change.
Yeah, I'm curious. I'm just curious of the approach. I'm very curious about what the Eagles' approach will be because I was so impressed with not only Hurts' execution, which was phenomenal against Pittsburgh, again, the last time he's played a full game, but the explosive plays. Both Smith and Brown were phenomenal against Pittsburgh. I'm like, man, and I know Andrew was talking about it. You know, the Eagles have been so sluggish to come out, but that was one game they weren't. To me, I don't think you back off. The Eagles, other than Washington, they protect extremely well. They're phenomenal in protection. And Gainwell on third down is a phenomenal pass protector. We've talked about that now for 2 or 3 years. So they're in really good shape here to score points, again, if the weather holds up.
I guess we're going to learn a lot about Kellen Moore and how he feels about this Eagles team. Does he go into the playoffs, like Adam says, Andrew, coaching aggressively, throwing the ball downfield, getting that no huddle, getting them in spread, or is it playoff time? And you know what happens to some coaches in the playoffs? We really haven't seen Kellen Moore, at least with this Eagles offense, and we don't know if he's going to play it safe, conservative, try to get Barkley going early, or if he's going to come out guns a-blazing. That to me is one of the fascinating subplots of this matchup.
Yeah, that's what makes it really interesting because Kellen Moore, I'm not sure how you guys feel about this, but I expected to see a little bit more from him in terms of the motion and the innovation offensively. But really, I think once the Eagles settled in and found their identity as a run-first offense, that really took precedent. You didn't see a lot of the explosive plays, those fast starts, and it seemed like they were really willing to lean on their offensive line, which is really the unsung heroes of the Philadelphia Eagles. That's why I don't know if he'll deviate now, is my thought process. But who knows? We'll have to see if he pulls out all the stops against Green Bay.
Adam, it would have been nice to see, and only the people inside the building really know. It would have been nice to see designed rollouts and boots for Jalen Hurts, who has all the athleticism in the world, that you saw executed for and called for Tanner McKee against the Giants.
All players, right?
Some of that might have been Kellen Moore thinking there's no way the Giants are going to think we're going to roll out with Tanner McKee, but it doesn't really matter about the element of surprise. You have a quarterback in Jalen Hurts who is athletic enough to be able to either throw or run in that situation. And yet, as Andrew alluded to, I don't think we've seen the full, at least, resume of what we've seen from Kellen Moore in the past. He has adjusted more to the personnel that he has and what he feels his team is comfortable with and not comfortable with.
Yeah, it's their first year together, right? I don't know that Kellen knew that they'd run the ball as much as they have. And obviously, when you see Barkley running like this is historic. Okay, I get it. Totally get it. Become a run team. Why fight it? They're 14-3 because of it, so it's good coaching. But I agree with what Andrew said. I don't want to say I've been underwhelmed. I'm a little bit surprised, although I know Greg Cosell told us that they did a lot of good things. The game plan against Pittsburgh was a lot like Kellen. It's ironically, the Green Bay game was all Kellen. That was the only true Kellen Moore game, was the Green Bay game from beginning to end. Ironically, week 1. Now here we are. But I thought the Pittsburgh game was a lot of that stuff. Now let's talk about Tanner McKee. Andrew and I were at training camp, and we were talking to our friend Mike Quick, who, as you know, Geoff, came on our show for Patreon. Well, I don't know what week it was. I mean, it was like he was a scout, just going like he was an area scout. Guys, I got to talk about this kid, Tanner McKee. We're like, okay. Yeah. And he went on for like 5 minutes, Andrew, as you smile, about he loves Tanner McKee. He's a former receiver, so he knows what he's looking at.
Yep.
So I just remember when Andrew and I would be at training camp, and I go, wow, I didn't know that Tanner McKee could roll out, because they were doing that with him. I was like, wow, because I didn't see that last summer, the summer before, 23.
Yeah.
So this is, Andrew, as I sent it to you. This to me is some part of the growth. And you know what? Tanner McKee is a guy, he's under contract one more year over Kenny Pickett. Pickett's contract's over in 25, after 25, and Tanner's is 26. It's pretty interesting what they found here with Tanner McKee.
Yeah, so the Eagles actually do 20 minutes of a developmental period before Friday's practice and then another 20 minutes afterwards. And that's obviously been grossly beneficial to players like Tanner McKee and Will Shipley and the like, everybody that you saw in that game. But now it's very interesting because you saw now a game and some change of Tanner McKee, and he was going against starting defense. So I mean that's not like preseason where he's going into the third and fourth quarter. I think you've seen enough there based on the 2 years of data in practice and in training camp and the preseason to feel pretty comfortable moving forward with him as your second quarterback. But I didn't think Kenny Pickett did a bad job against the Dallas Cowboys either. But I think if you're the Eagles, you're going to be really you like what Tanner McKee is making. He's still on that rookie deal, so that may be the determining factor.
That's, oh man, I just think the whole like the discourse about how Tanner should have been the number 2 over Kenny after putting up 20 points against the
Yeah, I
Giants
know.
in the
Yeah.
season finale got so crazy. All right, let's close the show off on this. This is going to be a fun way to close this show. This is about our confidence level in the Eagles beating the Packers Sunday, 4:30. Now, the last I checked on DraftKings Sportsbook, they were 4.5-point favorites. Of course, the line is always subject to change and move, but the Eagles 4.5-point favorites over the Packers in percentage points, 78%, 90, 20, whatever. Adam, how confident are you the Eagles will beat the Packers in percentage points?
It's funny. I never do percentages, but I actually had. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a season ticket holder, and he didn't ask me that exact question, but he said, "Do you think they're going to win?" I said, they got an 80% chance to win." And he asked me why, and I go, because they have the better roster. It's not a criticism of the Packers coaching staff. It's one of the best coaching staffs that I've seen here in a while. Coaching matters. We'll always say that. It does, no matter what some fans think. They think it's all about players. Yes, you can't really have one without the other. Got to have both. And they've got a lot. They got a good thing going on, a little bit better than I thought this season, and it's a cool thing. And they got a great vibe going. Andrew knows for being in the locker room now for a bunch of years. And I remember Andrew and I were hosting a show, filling in for you, Geoff, earlier this season, and I turned it over to him. I said, "All right, what's going on in the locker room? Tell us about the vibe between last year and this year." And Andrew went on for minutes at explaining how sullen they were last year when they'd win these crazy games when it didn't look like they'd win, but they weren't happy. Andrew, as I sent it to you, how confident do you think these players are right now?
Extremely, Adam, extremely. Not only do you see the results when you win 14 games,
Yeah.
but they have each other's back. And that sounds, cliche. It might sound even a little corny, but based on everything that I've been able to glean and seeing how the team came together from the spring through training camp through the regular season, there's a unified belief and a close-knit nature to this Eagles team that reminds me very much of the 2022 Eagles, where they fight for each other, they believe in each other, and they try to get it done together. They're playing complementary football, and they're just having fun. The last season, you mentioned it. I told you the Christmas Day game when I walked into the locker room, you could almost hear a pin drop. They won that game, but you wouldn't be able to tell.
Wow.
And now they're enjoying these moments. They're celebrating together, and that really all stems from Nick Sirianni and his messaging.
Well, let me ask you one question off of that. Do you think it's okay, the serious nature, not that you want to, we know they joke. I mean, they joke around, but do you think it's maybe some guys, we don't need to call any players out, but the locker room's changed a little bit, obviously. Certain players are no longer there. Because it is amazing how you go from, okay, the Sean Desai situation where some of the players didn't like him. It's not, Geoff and I have talked about it. We detailed this thing. Others have as well. And I know you know about it, Andrew. So is it just that the buy-in's better? Why is the culture so much better?
Well, I think it's an interesting blend of veteran leaders and young players who are moldable, and the position coaches. I think they're doing a much better at commanding the rooms. Vic Fangio is overseeing the defense,
Yeah.
so you know what the expectations are. You know exactly what the demands are, and Kellen Moore as well. And Nick Sirianni, I think, learned a lot from last season. So I think there's a lot of different elements that go into why you're seeing the Eagles have so much success and why you see the close-knit nature of this team. I think a lot of it stems from coaching, but a lot of it is the players and the leadership there and the coaching.
I said this from the beginning of the season, and I think it holds true that the biggest reason the Eagles defense would be improved, it was not necessarily talent, but because A, they were getting younger and more dynamic, and B, there would be one voice, Vic Fangio, and because he brought in so many coaches who had already coached under him, the only coach on his staff who has not coached with him was the linebackers coach, right? Who's
Bobby
done an
King,
excellent
yeah.
job, Bobby King. One voice would spread the message. It would trickle down to the position coaches, to the players at each position, and you would not have the confusion, the disruption, the disharmony, whatever you want to call discombobulation from last year, having veterans who did it one way, having a new defensive coordinator trying to learn his team, having another former defensive coordinator looking over the new defensive coordinator's shoulders who runs a different scheme. You had the recipe for disaster last year. This year, I felt that the message would be streamlined from top to bottom, and I thought it was important that they got young players in because young players are just trying to get better, trying to listen to their coach. They're not entitled yet. They're not multimillionaires. They don't have their own opinions on how the defense should be run. They do what their coaches say, and I think that is a huge reason for the success this year.
So, Geoff, are you trying to say that we don't have a situation with Jim Washburn calling Juan Castillo Juanita? Is that what you're saying?
Not only
Sorry to bring that up.
what happened last year, Adam, we didn't really talk about this. We predicted it. We didn't predict it, but we said going into last year, we hope that the defensive coaching staff there was not a repeat of what happened to the offensive coaching staff under Doug Peterson in his final year with the team when he had the Andrew Briner and the Marty Morningweg and the Rich Scangarello and the Press Taylor, where you had all these different ideologies coming together. I remember us saying, I hope that that's not the case with the defense and the defensive staff. Well, guess what? It turned out to be exactly the case. You had different ideologies, different voices, and the communication was not there. It was evident because guys were wide open. Guys on defense had no idea what to do. Then they start complaining. Then the defensive coordinator gets yanked out of his spot, and then it was just a mess.
I would say this, and I know we've talked to our friend John DiFilippo about this, because coaches know coaches. You kind of know when the staff isn't very good or there's some dead weight on coaching staffs. This staff does not have any dead weight. We don't need to go back to 2019 or 2020 when you just outlined it very well.
Right.
But this staff also, man, is just so good. And I love, and I've said this a bunch of times, I would go back, and Andrew knows about this from being there. Listen to Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis talk about Vic Fangio in the spring, particularly Jalen Carter, because he talked about wanting to be coached and the old school mentality. They wanted to be coached. He's the guy. And how about those Dolphins who are not in the playoffs? How do you think they feel right now?
Well,
Who can play?
I don't even think
they're a mess as it is.
Yeah, I don't think he's a thought in their mind. But I will to add to that. All summer, Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis were asked about their conditioning, and they understood the responsibility that was placed on their shoulders, that the onus fell on them to more or less become the face of the defense with Fletcher Cox having retired. And it's one thing to say it. It's another thing to match those words with action, and they're still playing excellent football throughout the regular season, whereas their play tailed off. And I think that's a direct testament to their commitment and really being receptive to the tough coaching.
I will give Jalen Carter his chops. Jordan Davis played well against the Giants against a terrible center.
He still had to go out there and play, though.
No, he did. So I'll give him his credit for that. But he's left some, for me at least, some to be desired as a defensive tackle who was drafted as high as he was. And we'll see how much he plays against the Packers because they run the ball. And he, to your point, Andrew, he is going to have a good game and establish himself for them to be able to contain Jacobs. I agree with you.
It starts with a run. You just mentioned Josh Jacobs. It starts there. And we're going to talk more about this later in the week when we preview the game. But Matt LaFleur is one of these balanced guys. He must have balance. This is something that bothers me about this guy.
I know, he's not even a defensive coach. It's amazing.
I know. And this is the year of the run. Everyone's talking. It's true. I mean, the run game all of a sudden has made a revival. Usually everything's cyclic, as Marty Morningweg would say. But it's going to be a fun matchup. I just wish Christian Watson was playing, but he's not. He tore his ACL. We'll get into that and what we think is going to happen. But it's going to be a fun matchup for the Eagles here. And they host it. And Nick Sirianni's on a roll here, so we'll see what happens.
All right, Adam, you were on record. You said 88% when I asked you.
80%.
I'm sorry, 80. I thought 88 sounded high. 80. Andrew, percentage confidence?
85, I would say.
Ooh, that's high. Okay, 85%. I was at 77. I like the Packers. I think they're pretty good, and it was a very close game the first time, and I think that they've got some good weaponry. But the bottom line is we're all heavily favored here in thinking that the Eagles are going to win this game. It has been great to get together, both of you. I hope everybody's enjoyed this wonderful conversation. We'll continue to do this throughout the playoffs, so long as the Eagles hold up their end of the bargain and continue to play. So for Andrew DiCecco and Adam Caplan, I'm Geoff Mosher. You've been watching a special edition of Inside the Birds Playoff Edition.